I am Rachel Barry. I am the Director of Environmental Leadership for the group, working on sustainability since more than 15 years. And I will depict to you our intent to create an impact investing fund on biodiversity to regenerate nature. So about biodiversity, it's sometimes a bit hard to do links between business and biodiversity. But at L'Oréal, as a company, we've decided to act on biodiversity on two levels. The first level consists in considering biodiversity at every level of our value chain to guarantee that biodiversity is respected through all our activities, from the design of our product, of course, to the future of our packaging and the potential risk of leakage in the environment, but including as well what's happening in all of our sites. To do so, we have set some ambitious 2030 biodiversity targets within all our activity. But beyond our value chain, we've decided to participate to the needed acceleration for the conservation and regeneration of nature by creating an impact investing fund dedicated to the regeneration of nature within the scope of our 2030 commitments on biodiversity. Well, before going into the details of these commitments and the innovative financial mechanisms that we've put in place, I just wanted to return to some key elements of context so that to be on the same page on what's happening currently on biodiversity. Well, science is pretty unanimous on the level of the crisis, which is currently affecting biodiversity. Certain experts even qualify the huge decline in species that we attend as the sixth mass extinction over the world. If we take, for example, the Living Planet Index that WWF is publishing every year, we see that 60% of the vertebrates population will disappear in the coming 50 years. But this decline is not specific to vertebrates, and all ecosystems are today affected by this crisis of biodiversity, and especially those that are the home of the greatest part of biodiversity on Earth. The forest first, which have lost nearly 1/3 of their global area, especially due to the expansion of agriculture. And this is something that we even saw last year with 12 million hectares of forest, which have been lost in 2019. But the forests are not alone to suffer from this biodiversity crisis. The oceans too, with 1/3 of coral reefs and marine mammals that are today at risk of extinction, with several hundreds of dead zones that are observed in oceans worldwide, which has an impact, an important impact on the access to resources for people that are living in coastal communities, which are about 40% of the global population. These figures, facts, and crisis raises, of course, the consequence of this biodiversity collapse, both in terms of access to vital resources to a significant proportion of humanity, but for us all in our capacity to be resilient to the climate shocks to come. Because in fact, biodiversity provides us with a lot of goods and services of a considerable value to sustain our human life. The economic value of biodiversity has even been quantified as nearly $150,000 billion annually. Effectively, biodiversity is providing us with a lot of goods and services, such as access to clean air and clean water through purification, natural purification of pollutants, for example, but also access to food and crops, thanks to pollination, which is widely affected today, or again, soil degradation, soil productivity that sustain the production of most of our crops and food. Biodiversity provides us as well access to new drugs, innovation, technology, new molecules inspired by nature. And in this context of COVID crisis and sanitary major crisis, we know how the conservation of biodiversity can also have an impact on our sanitary context and impacts. Beyond access to new molecules, which is also important for us as a beauty company, We know that that this biodiversity is a very big natural carbon sink, thanks to ecosystems whose good health protect us from the climate shocks that we will all have to face, especially in coastal area, and especially for the people living in these areas. And if we refer to what experts say, we know that 30% of the solution in terms of the fight against climate crisis could directly come from the regeneration of nature, which capture a wide quantity of carbon, not only in the trees and the biomass of the trees, but also in the soils, carbon of soils, in wetlands, such as peatlands or mangroves, sorry. In face of this reality and of this challenge, we at L'Oréal have decided to take very bold targets on biodiversity, which are in line with the scale of the challenge that we are observing. And these bold commitments are covering all the steps of our value chain, from the sourcing of our ingredients to the selection of our packaging, including the footprint of our in-store formula, but also how we manage our sites over the world. For example, on the sourcing, this will be 100% of our bio-based ingredients and material that will be fully traceable and coming from certified sustainable sources. On that specific point, we are not starting from scratch. As of today, we already have almost 70% of our bio-based ingredients that are coming from certified sustainable sources. And this is something that we want to extend to 100% in the coming 10 years. On packaging as well, we are putting a lot of attention of their potential impact on nature and biodiversity, especially the question of plastic packaging, as we all have in mind the big risk of leakage to the environment. We commit that by 2030, 100% of our plastic packaging will be from recycled or bio-based origin. And by 2025, the latest, all of our plastic packaging will be either refillable, rechargeable, recyclable, or compostable. On our sites as well, we will put a lot of attention on our potential impact on biodiversity, and we commit here to be even going more contributors to a positive impact on biodiversity, as all our sites worldwide will have a net positive impact on biodiversity. Most of these sites are located in urban or peri-urban area, but we know how biodiversity is important in the specific sites, in its specific areas, for nature as well, but also for people. Regarding the potential impact of our formulas and products as well, we will pay particular attention on their potential impact on the aquatic ecosystems by having 100% of our formula all evaluated on our environmental testing platform to guarantee they are totally respectful to any kind of aquatic ecosystem, terrestrial or marine. And this is something that we want to measure, in terms of impact of these different efforts, in particular in the sourcing of our ingredients, through an impact indicator of our activities, and the impact of our activities on ecosystems, which we are committing to keeping stable by 2030 in comparison to 2019, while taking our growth into account. So as you can imagine, through this bold target, we will work diligently. We will work diligently on our own transformation, but we have decided to go beyond and to create a direct positive impact on nature, on biodiversity conservation, regeneration, by taking an action, by creating an impact investing fund fully dedicated to nature regeneration. To do that, we will collaborate with an external partner, the Mirova Natural Capital, to create an impact investing fund of 50 million euros, which is quite, for us at least, a quite new investment vehicle, which will be exclusively dedicated to regenerating two categories of ecosystems, forest and oceans. And this is something that we will deploy as rapidly as possible over the coming 3 years. A few words first about what is impact investing. Well, most of you must know that impact investing is not philanthropy. It is a new way of investing money, aiming at reconciling financial return on one side with also a positive, measurable social and environmental return. Usually, impact investing is defined through three pillars, three different levers. First, we want to have an impact, with a clear intent to have this impact. Then we want to be more just an investor with an additionality in the investment that we propose, and then to measure the impact of our investments through ESG criteria and impact criteria that we will monitor over time. As said before, this is something that we won't do alone, and we are partnering with Mirova Natural Capital to set up and to manage this fund. Mirova being a native impact investor, pure player in impact investing, with a 2-degree compliant investment portfolio, fully aligned with the Paris Agreement. Why it matters so much for biodiversity to innovate and creating new investment vehicle to fund biodiversity conservation. Well, first, because while there has been a strong development of impact investing over the past 10 years, with a market size of around $500 billion, a very limited portion of this impact investment is today dedicated to biodiversity conservation. And more generally, we see that nature, biodiversity conservation, biodiversity regeneration suffer a lot from underinvestment. While it accounts for 30% of GHG mitigation capacity, we see that it benefits only from 3% of the climate finance. And if we know that up to $400 billion are needed yearly to adequately fund biodiversity protection globally, only $50 billion are mobilized so far. The majority of this money coming from domestic government spending and also a bit from charities. We therefore need to bridge this huge financing gap on biodiversity conservation. And we think that a way to do that is to mobilize private capital, designing, for example, that kind of new products, such as impact investing funds, targeting nature conservation, specifically designed to fund nature regeneration, so that to scale up biodiversity finance with new innovative models, new kind of vehicles invested by the corporates. Very concretely, how this fund will work. Well, as you can imagine, as any investment fund, the L'Oréal fund is pulling capital into a purpose-driven vehicle. The 50 million euros are ring-fenced, fully dedicated. This is a fully dedicated fund and will be exclusively dedicated to nature conservation. This capital will be allocated to projects on the ground, and such allocation of money can take different forms, investments through equity, for example, but also project financing through debts. All the money of the fund, all the contribution from the fund will allow projects to be deployed on the ground and allocated to activities supporting nature regeneration and conservation activities. All the projects that will be invested in will be economically viable in order to repay the investment or the financing and generate positive impact over the long run, accordingly to the impact investment definition. About the project operators themselves, well, typical targeted operators will be, for example, NGOs, small enterprise, social businesses, green entrepreneurs, all promoting impactful activities. Of course, through these fundings, we will support and stimulate a lot of innovation practices and best practices so that to see new projects to emerge. This project will have together, well, different impacts, and what these projects are expected to generate are, of course, some ecosystem regeneration benefits, some opportunities of job creation for the communities living in or around this project, new livelihood opportunities for these people, but also a return on investment from the monetization of all the environmental assets that will be produced by this project, such as carbon credits, for example, that will be sold in the voluntary markets, and or other source of sustainable products arising from the project, such as the production of sustainable commodities. And ultimately, of course, if everything goes well, the repayment from the project will be made to the L'Oréal Fund and ultimately repaid to L'Oréal. Why we wanted to introduce this new model and this innovative approach to you today is that because we are completely convinced at L'Oréal that these new kind of coalitions and initiatives are needed for the transformation of the economy at scale, and especially for the support of biodiversity conservation and nature regeneration, which is a big challenge, and especially in that period of sanitary crisis. And we are deeply convinced that corporates can play a big role in partnership and innovation approach to finance biodiversity. And we deeply think that that as a corporate, we have a big role to play on supporting that kind of innovative approach to finance biodiversity. In terms of impact, of course, well, this fund will have a very significant and well, a concrete impact on the ground. not only on the environment in terms of biodiversity conservation, regeneration, but also on the people and on the communities that will live within or around this project or through this project. Through this investment, through the fund, we expect 1 million hectares of regenerated ecosystems, both forests and oceans, leading together to the capture of at least 15 to 20 million tons of CO2 equivalent. The creation of hundreds of new jobs, direct or indirect, and especially for women who play, we know, in these communities a major role at local level in terms of environmental management and stewardship. All of this being achieved very consistently with economic priorities, of course, as impact investment. Each of these projects finding their own viability and profitability to make sure that we can sustain a long-term success of all these activities and projects. We are currently in the process of selecting this project and building our deal flow pipe. Among the first project analyzed, just to provide you some example, there are some forestry projects in Central Africa. The support, for example, to agroforestry practices in Central America, so that to restore degraded soils. Or again, the restoration of fragile ecosystems such as mangroves in Southeast Asia, or the creation of marine protected areas in very fragile islands over the world. So I'm done with the presentation. Sorry again for the interruption, and I'll be happy to take some of your question if you have about L'Oréal biodiversity commitments or the creation of the impact investment fund for the regeneration of nature. Do not hesitate to ask your question. You have the flow chat and the possibility to write your question. So I hope to be clear enough. Sorry for the interruption again. Okay, so I read a question about how the fund will be managed. So we have this is a dedicated fund of L'Oréal, of course, fully dedicated to nature regeneration, which will be managed in partnership with our partner Mirova Natural Capital. So we have built some committees, investment committees at Mirova's Natural Capital level, of course, but also mirror committees within L'Oréal, expert committees, so that to participate actively to the selection of projects, but also steering committee. So that to manage the overall functioning of the fund. This is a deep partnership between the two actors. We are actively participating to the selection process. Mirova is managing and operating the fund as the fund manager, and we are creating and investigating new project together. If you are interested about the criteria, the investment thesis and the criteria, they are all public on our website, so do not hesitate to go there. We have published eligibility criteria, self-assessment forms, so that project developers can check eligibility of their initiatives. I have some question arriving now. Who is going to work on the ESG analysis of the project investment? So this is something which is taken by Mirova's team, and they have a track record on impact investing, and they have their internal teams to make the assessment. Each project selected to go to the fund will go through an in-depth due diligence, going through dedicated ESG criteria methodology. This will be taken in charge by Mirova's team directly. I have another question. Does L'Oréal involve local actors in its initiatives? How and at what point in the process does it involve these actors? Thanks for the question. So we are receiving application from many actors all over the world directly to us through Mirova team as well. And these local actors are submitting their project at the moment as we are building the pipe. We have a public set of eligibility criteria that you can consult on our websites, some self-assessment forms as well. So you can refer to that. All the project will be selected through this process and of course operated by local actors directly, by the project developers and project owners. I have a question about L'Oréal, not specifically on the fund, but L'Oréal have any plans to address the environmental and social impact of its activities? Well, definitely. I mean, these funds do not replace our transformation strategy on sustainability. We have launched back in June this year our new targets for 2030 called L'Oréal for the Future Sustainability Program, where we have taken some bold commitments on climate, water, biodiversity, but also the use of resources. So this fund is a complementary approach of our internal transformation that we've built through a science-based approach, not only on climate, but also on the other domains of the environment. And the objective is really to align our business activities to the planetary boundaries by transforming ourselves and reducing our environmental and social impact during the coming decades. This fund is part of a group of 3 funds, actually. We are dedicating 150 million euros in total to support to bring direct support to big environmental and social challenges. One is on women, with an endowment fund dedicated to women of 50 million euros, and one on circular economy, $15 million as well. So yes, we do work on both sides, internal transformation with science-based approach or science-based target aligned on planetary boundaries, and direct positive impact through this fund. Maybe we can take a last question. Your commitments to sustainability are impressive. Thanks for that. What drives you to set such bold objectives? Well, of course, the state of the world. We know that as a company, we have a big role to play to be part of the solution to resolve most of the challenges that we are facing today. Environmental challenges, but also the social challenges of this environmental crisis, climate crisis, of course, biodiversity crisis, lack of access to water as well. So this is a condition for us to be able to continue to operate, but also a new role that we have to lead the way, as we have done in the years before, well, to demonstrate that sustainability must be the new normal, and that we all have to commit to reduce our impact and to align our activities in what the science recommends, environmental science recommend. We have strong leadership from our top management, of course, on these sustainability topics, but also strong expectation from our stakeholders, and especially the consumers that want to change their consumption patterns. So I think that we are arriving at the end of the session. I would like to sorry again for this short interruption, and thanks you a lot for your multiple questions. I'm of course at your disposal. May you have any additional question to ask, and thank you again for your participation and attention to this session on biodiversity. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.